you know, I'd like to connect with customers and kind of build a relationship with them. And how can I connect up with this 80-year-old guy? And I said, let's go down to Columbus and watch your precast for your building. Precast walls is what this building had being fabricated. And so picked him up, we're driving down. I said, Mr. Smith, what do you like to do for fun? He says, well, I have a sailboat. I keep it in San Diego. And he says, I'm planning a trip where I'm going to sail my travails through World War II. And I said, wow, what did you do? He says, well, I was a World War II fighter pilot. And so I'm looking at this guy. I'm thinking, okay, he's about 5'4" tall. He's got one leg that's shorter than the other because his sole on one shoe was about this thick. He had the world's worst toupee. He had glasses that were this thick. And I'm thinking, this is not my vision of a fighter pilot. And so it turned out he flew Corsairs, which is the gull-wing airplane that the movie series Baba Black Sheep flew, and they were Marines that flew these airplanes. And so he had several stories. I'm going to tell them all, but you can capture them, do whatever you want with them. So on the drive down with Mr. Smith, I started asking him questions. With my interest in aviation, this was a pretty fascinating thing for me to talk to this guy. I said, well, how did you get to be a Marine pilot? And he said, well, I was at Ohio State and I was dating this girl. I was trying to impress her. So I went down to the part of the campus that they were signing up Air Force pilots. And the Air Force guys said, we're full, we don't need any, but go down to the post office in Columbus and the Marines are looking for pilots. So I went down there, I signed up, and that's how I became a Marine pilot. I said, well, what'd you fly? He says, I flew the Corsair, and it was a airplane that was a blue gull-wing airplane, and my squadron was the first squadron to get the Corsair, and we kept wrecking them. And so I said, well, how'd you get around it? And he said, well, they brought Charles Lindbergh in and taught us how to fly that airplane. I said, you knew Charles Lindbergh? He said, yeah, we called him Chuck. And I said, wow, that's great. I said, did you hang out with him? He said, yeah, he lived with us, ate dinner, you know, was with us all the time, played cards with him. I said, you played cards with Charles Lindbergh? He goes, no, that son of a gun, he cheated all the time. I never played cards with him. And so I said, well, how'd you get from the United States with your Corsairs to the Japanese theater? He said, well, we took off from where we were training and we were heading to the West Coast and we were going to land on the carriers and then we were going to go overseas. And he said, but we went through Texas. And I said, well, Texas is out of the way. He said, yes. He said, my commanding officer of our squadron wanted to see his wife one more time before he went to war. And so we went through Texas and we took off from Texas and we're flying towards the West Coast and we got in a bad storm and we had to do kind of an emergency landing at a military base. And he said, we landed and it turned out it was a Women's Air Corps base. So here we are. I'm envisioning these young hotshot pilots with these new hotshot airplanes that nobody had been flying before. And he said we landed at a Women's Air Corps base and there were 300 to 400 women there and they hadn't seen a man in 6 months. And he says, you know, the next 3 days were the best 3 days of my life. But you can imagine these young hotshot pilots with these hotshot airplanes and these women hadn't seen a guy in 6 months and he smiled. Those are the best 3 days of my life.
They were.
So then he gets to the Japanese theater and I said, what was it like? He said, well, you know, we had one mission that I didn't like. We flew low-level mission to go out over the jungles and we'd find the Japanese munitions barges that were that we would log where they were and we'd go back and report and then the Marines would try to go in and blow them up at night. And these Japanese barges were all painted blue, but when they were hiding them, they would cover them up with green foliage. And it wasn't a mission that we liked. He said it was really dangerous and we just didn't like it. And he said after my first one, my commanding officer called me back into his tent and said, Lieutenant Smith, how did you know where all those barges were? And he said, well, sir, you can send me home if you want, but I'm colorblind. And those those, I can't see green, but that blue sticks out like a sore thumb to me. And he says, damn it, if I didn't get one of those missions every week for the next 6 months. But, you know, a pilot, you can't be colorblind. I said, well, how did you get through the colorblind test? He said, well, I had a friend who was in optometry school at Ohio State that showed me how to read the colorblind book. So that's how he got in to be a Marine pilot.